federal regulations that regulate group well-being insurance plan in the USA. The Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, also known as COBRA, was enacted in 1985 to extend team well-being coverage to former workers and their family members for up to 18 or 36 months soon after termination of employment. An employer team ought to consist of at the very least 20 workers. The COBRA quality price remains the same as the team price, but the terminated personnel pays additional because there is no longer an employer contribution. Qualifying for COBRA occurs when the personnel, wife or husband, or dependent baby results in being ineligible for coverage underneath the team coverage. Examples include family members coverage soon after the dying of a quoted personnel, termination of employment or reduction of hours underneath whole-time position, Medicare eligibility, lawful separation, spousal coverage, baby ineligibility on the team approach. Or if the employer declares personal bankruptcy and employment finishes. Personnel termination ensuing from misconduct does not qualify underneath COBRA. A competent beneficiary is deemed to be any individual quoted underneath the team policy the day ahead of the qualifying function occurs and generally contains the personnel, wife or husband, and dependent children. Composed eligibility notification ought to be specified to workers and wife or husband or other dependents by the employer when the team approach results in being suitable for COBRA or when a qualifying function occurs. A 60-day interval is allowed to elect COBRA coverage, soon after which the personnel is no longer suitable. The objective of continuation coverage is to present time for the terminated personnel to either utilize for new coverage underneath a new team approach or utilize separately, or turn out to be suitable for Medicare. A most of 18 months is allowed if employment was terminated or hours were being minimized to considerably less than whole-time position, although all other qualifying gatherings allow for 36 months of continuous coverage. COBRA coverage finishes when a disqualifying function occurs. These types of as failure to fork out quality, Medicare entitlement, or at the time new coverage is issued. The Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, also known as OBRA, was enacted in 1989. And it extends COBRA continuation positive aspects from 18 months to 29 months for disabled workers at the time of the qualifying function or who turn out to be disabled during the to start with 60 days of COBRA coverage. It also clarified Medicare entitlement compared to eligibility to be certain that the individual is quoted by Medicare ahead of getting deemed a disqualifying function. The Wellbeing Insurance Plan Portability and Accountability Act, also known as HIPAA, was enacted July 1, 1997. It gives the two for the portability of team coverage from one employer to another or from an employer-sponsored policy to an individual policy if starting to be self-employed. There are numerous widespread elements to HIPAA. A single part is that a new employer ought to supply continuous coverage to a new personnel if the personnel is switching from a former employer's coverage, if formerly quoted for at the very least the final 18 months. Insurance plan portability is mandated for 63 days concerning positions, to allow ample time for in-personnel to switch coverages. Personal coverage as a result of self-employment is deemed transportable from team coverage. Also, pre-existing affliction exclusions for any individual seeking clinical tips in the final 6 months can only utilize for the to start with 12 months of a new approach and does not utilize to new child treatment, adopted children, or existing being pregnant as of the productive date of the policy. The Personnel Retirement and Income Security Act, also known as ERISA, was enacted in 1974. and it protects team coverage members in opposition to insurance company and employer misconduct by demanding stringent file preserving and reporting of all well-being approach transactions. Positive aspects: amendments, promises, denials, and certificates of participation. Administrative information ought to be maintained with the Division of Labor, and fiscal stories ought to be submitted per year with the IRS. The Age Discrimination in Work Act, also known as AEDA, was enacted in 1967 and applies to employer teams of 20 or additional workers. The ADEA's protections utilize to the two workers and position candidates age 40 and older from employment discrimination based mostly on age. The Tax Fairness and Fiscal Accountability Act, also known as TEFRA, was enacted in 1982 and applies to employer teams of 20 or additional workers. It protects workers and their spouses concerning ages 65–69 from discrimination in team daily life coverage from only getting provided to essential workers, HESA types of as executives or PIC major tiered workers, and not the complete team. It calls for older workers to acquire the same coverage as youthful workers. Ultimately, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, also known as ADA, was enacted in 1990 and applies to employer teams of 15 or additional workers. It protects competent people today with disabilities in position application procedures, choosing, firing, development, payment, and all other aspects of employment. It also calls for disabled workers to be specified equivalent accessibility to the group's well-being treatment coverage and simply cannot limit or exclude team well-being coverage for deafness, AIDS, cancer, major disease, or normal incapacity.